Loud. And here we go. Hi, Yael.
Hi, Steve. What's new and exciting in your world?
Oh, kind of the same old, same old.
Oh, really? What are you up to these days?
I often respond to that question with 5'2", but
Okay, what are you doing these days, smart Alec?
off to a good start. What am I doing these days? I am writing and speaking and coaching and creating some new cool stuff.
Oh, that sounds exciting. So, what are you
Yeah.
doing with all that?
Well, largely it's been the the latest project that I just completed the last iteration of
Hmm.
was I spoke in my Toastmasters group about igniting your inner raconteur, which is about how to use writing to heal your broken heart.
Oh, that's cool.
And what I'm realizing from working on that speech is that, stories oftentimes about how do you go from pain to pleasure, right? How do you go from feeling
Right.
down and awful to feeling good?
Right. That seems to be like, I mean, that's pretty much the theme of here, too. So, it is, if you
Yes.
think about it.
Yeah. So how do you create something new and exciting when you're
Hmm.
feeling low and beaten down?
Right. How do you retell your story
Right.
in a
How do you
different
reframe
light?
it? How do you retell it? How do you
Hmm.
start something new and exciting rather than just
Exactly. It's kind of like when we started this conversation and I said what's new and exciting. The tone in your voice was very different when you said, "Oh, same old, same old." The tone in your voice was very different than now that you're actually talking about it
right.
because now you're actually telling the story.
That's a good point. And it is interesting how that lines up with my major story
Hmm.
that when I didn't feel like there was anything new and exciting in my life, when it
Right.
felt like the same old, and I was going to continue on the same hamster wheel for the next 20 years,
Right.
it was very different energy than when I realized I could create something new and
Yeah.
exciting.
This theme seems to be coming up quite a bit around me these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ken's been having some trouble sleeping.
Mm,
Um, and I the poor guy, he just this morning when I woke up, he said he only got a few hours of sleep and it wasn't very restful and he's exhausted.
mm.
And he's so exhausted. He's like, if any advice, he's like, what can I do? I'm open to suggestions. Basically, just help me. He's literally crying out for help.
Mm.
Literally. So
Is it related to anything that he's dealt with in the past, or is this something new and
the problem is that he feels like he's trying. He's been trying everything he could think of, anything that's worked in the past.
yep.
So um I the only thing I gave him, the piece of advice that I gave him, which I'm very flattered that he totally listened to, is that as you're going about your day, set an intention for what you're doing right now.
Mm,
Like at the time he was headed out the door to go walk the dogs. Like right now you're going to go walk the dogs. Just get through that because like I said, he was exhausted at the time.
mm,
He just wants to go crawl back into bed.
right.
So I was like, right now, just get through walking the dogs. We'll worry about the rest later. We'll worry about the rest of the day, getting ready for work and then, dealing with work and all that kind of stuff. All the stuff you got to do before you can go back to bed. We'll
Yes.
worry about it one piece at a time. So
Yeah.
right now, just go walk the dogs and enjoy it. Find something about it that you love. You're going outside, getting some fresh air, get to take the dogs out, making the dogs happy because they get to go outside.
Mm,
Just something to appreciate in that particular moment.
yes. You know, two things. One, I've had many restless nights,
Mm-hmm.
sleepless nights sometimes,
Right.
and there is nothing more frustrating than being tired and wanting to sleep and being
Right.
in bed and not being
Right.
able to sleep. It
Yeah.
just
I've been there.
it's so exasperating. And the
Yeah.
second thing is last night I woke up about 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
in pain. And
In pain. Is
yeah,
everything okay?
it is now, but
Okay.
it wasn't for a while.
Okay.
And the way that I dealt with it was first, I, I don't know how much I want to disclose here because it was pain in areas that I
Oh, no details needed. I understand. Got it. Okay.
so I'm like, okay, what can I do? And so I tried some different uh, ointments and that type of thing, and
Right.
it just didn't solve the problem. So I ended up
Yeah.
taking a bath, which we don't normally take baths, normally take showers. And
Right.
before I took the bath, I wanted the bath to be clean, so I cleaned the bathtub.
You were really productive as you were trying to not as you were.
Well, it's kind of like what you're saying about Ken, right?
Yeah.
How do you put your attention on something other than what you're feeling right now, whether that be
Right.
tired or pain or whatever
Right.
it may be. So I was putting my focus on getting the bathtub clean.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the bathtub clean, run really hot water, and that helped initially, probably for 15, 20 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
But then the pain just started coming back, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end?
Right.
And then by that time, Martha, I'm in the bathroom groaning, just
Right.
probably by this time about 4 o'clock, 4:30, and Martha's
Oh.
awoken
Right.
by that time. And she's asking, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not really." And I think by that time, oh, so she went out to get some ibuprofen. Turns out we only had one ibuprofen pill in the
Oh my
whole
God.
house.
Oh my God.
But she got that, brought it to me, brought me
Right.
some water and some yogurt so I could have the pill on not an empty stomach.
Right. So yeah,
But I'm going through all this and I'm just like, God, let's just end. And finally, I was able to get back to sleep. But this is after an hour and a half of just, kind of excruciating pain and just,
right.
ugh,
What did Martha fall back asleep or how
she did.
she did?
Martha's really good at,
Oh, she's one of those people who can just put her head down and she's out.
she can, but she does not sleep deeply.
Oh,
She's,
okay.
so I've had, like when I don't know, she's rarely like totally asleep where if I ask her a question.
Oh, right. Got
So
it.
it's different. But anyway, yeah, she was able to go back to sleep.
Okay.
We both slept in rather much longer than we would have normally.
Okay.
But
I wonder if there's something in the stars right now. It's Mercury in retrograde again or something. I don't know. It's a thing.
yeah,
So anyway, so what I explained to him was that basically by doing this today, he's going to be he's practicing being in the moment, setting an intention. It's segment intending is what it's called.
hmm,
And as you're practicing segment intending, you're practicing it all day long and you're realizing, hey, I can do this, one piece at a time, one chunk of life at a time.
sure.
And then by tonight, when after work is done, after everything is done, by tonight, when he goes to bed and he sets the intention, I'm going to lay down, I'm going to go to sleep and get a good night's rest. By that time, he will have had all this practice doing that.
Mm,
So then he can go to bed and get a good night's sleep.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
That's the way I see it. And that was the advice I gave him. And I'm really, really flattered that he was really listening, and he's plans to make a conscious effort to do that. And I told him, even if, because that's what I do a lot. Um,
Segment
and
intending.
yeah. And that's what works for me. Um, and even if it doesn't work out for him, the fact that he's willing to give it a shot and really and really listen and really try it, to me,
Sure.
that's really flattering. So
Yeah. And validating, right?
mhm,
That this thing that you found as really helpful is something that Ken is trying out and trusting you to provide
right.
guidance on. This conversation is
Yeah.
reminding me of some feedback that I got on the speech that I delivered yesterday. And one of the things that I talked
Oh, okay.
about was when my job was in jeopardy back in the end of 2012.
Okay.
I used the word heartbreaking to talk about what I was going through at the time.
For a
And
job? That's interesting.
well, that was actually the comment was it would the feedback was perhaps a better phrase would be life shattering.
Yeah.
What I realized through that feedback was that the part of that was heartbreaking wasn't the job per se,
Mhm.
because several months later things had changed to the degree that when I was actually being let go, I was
Right.
biting my tongue because I was just so excited, and I was holding back laughter.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But back in that moment when I was feeling my heart was breaking,
Mhm.
what was going on was more the it triggered me into the deepest depression I've ever been in.
Right.
And I just wanted the pain to end, kind of like
Mhm.
last night, but even worse because I was.
Right.
And
At the time you were thinking of a more permanent
yes,
solution or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, which part of what that experience was hearing the phrase from myself, my higher
Mhm.
self, the universe, God,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
but don't use a permanent solution to solve a temporary
Right.
problem.
Yes.
And
I'm glad you didn't, by the way.
me too. I had no idea how good life could get at
I
that
love
time.
to hear you say that. Honestly, I love to hear you say that. That's wonderful. It's
It
wonderful.
is. It, and I'm just thrilled that life has turned out the way that it has.
Mhm.
And part of that is it wasn't happenstance. Your initial question, what's new and exciting,
Mhm.
that doesn't new and exciting doesn't just happen. Sometimes it does,
Right.
but
Right.
sometimes we have to be really intentional, maybe
Mhm.
do some segment intending
Right.
where we're saying
What are you doing with this moment?
exactly. And so I went from that point where I was severely depressed, dangerously depressed,
Mhm.
to being elated when I actually got the news that,
That you're
okay,
fired.
well, I wasn't fired, I was let go. So
What
I
does
was
that
laid
mean?
off.
Oh, okay.
So the difference is that I got a severance package and
Oh,
all
that's
kinds of
cool.
stuff. So
So it turned okay, so it all worked out wonderfully in the end. That's awesome.
right.
I mean, you got the severance package. To me, the severance package is basically giving you time,
Yes.
because as long as you had a severance package, you knew that things were covered for a certain amount of time after, when you're not working, as you're looking for another job or looking for your next adventure or whatever you're going to do.
Right.
The severance package, that was a gift of time.
Yes, it
So
was.
that's how I see that anyway. So
I did.
cool. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No, that was perfect. But in that gift of time,
Hmm.
which actually lasted several years, but there is also in the short period of time between December 6th, 2012
Hmm.
to March, essentially the same time,
Okay.
2013, I went from being devastated by the possibility of losing my job to
Right.
being elated that I was no longer working there. And the difference wasn't so much the job, the difference was letting go of the old identity of who I was and
Mm-hmm.
beginning to bring in the new identity of who I was, and not having my identity wrapped up in what other people thought of me. That they
Right.
could think whatever they're going to think about me. I don't have that much control over that, but I have total control eventually over how I think about myself and how I think about my relationship with myself.
Right.
And that's what's I find new and exciting, is that we can continually uh, create that relationship with ourselves, with our world, with our work, with other people, that it can continually improve and get better and richer.
Yeah.
We can continue to deliver a richer story because we're refining the elements of our story in a way that is really healing.
Yeah. I love what we're doing here. And honestly, I think that I'm glad we waited as long as we did to actually, move ahead with it and stuff, because I've learned like 50 times more than I've learned between what we've talked about and just life in general as it's happened over the last, whatever year. I think it's like about a year now,
Yeah, it's getting close to it.
um, that we've been working on this. But in the meantime, I feel like this has come together so well. I feel like in the way that we talk on these recordings, I feel like we're able to get the message across as to how important stories are,
Hmm.
and telling your story and owning your story and what it is about, how it creates, how you're creating your own story. So
Yes.
basically we're through our conversations, and my purpose in these podcasts is to help people understand how powerful they are, because
Hmm.
people feel so powerless. People feel like just life is happening to them.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I know this because I did.
Hmm.
Because I until I I feel enlightened. It's weird.
Well, that's a
So
really good way to describe, how I was feeling when I was so devastated, was that I
right.
felt very powerless.
Yes.
And when I felt elated, just a few short months later,
Mhm.
I no longer felt powerless. I was still dealing with pretty massive depression and
Right. Yeah, your life wasn't perfect by any means, but it had moved you out of that horrible space that you were in at the time. At least it moved you out of there so that you could, start to get some footing and climb up a little bit, you know?
absolutely. And realize, that they could let me go, you
Mhm.
know, and life would continue on. That, they
Well,
could
they're
do
not in
whatever.
charge of how you feel.
Exactly.
You're in charge of how you feel. They're in
And how I
charge of
respond. And
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. I mean, you could have gotten that, had that meeting with them and been terminated. Your employment's been terminated, and you could have left there and thought, "Oh my God, now what am I going to do?"
right.
That could have thrown you into a whole different, cycle of events, but it didn't. And instead, because you had the perspective you did, you were able to use that opportunity to build what you have now,
Yes.
you know?
And it's interesting that the meditation I did this morning was about, while I was on the subject of heartbreak, I did a meditation on heartbreak.
Mhm.
And the guide for that meditation had us thinking about heartbreak, while painful and, a source of grief and struggle
Mhm.
and so forth, worry, that it also helps us to see our humanity, right? It
Yes.
helps us to
Yeah.
see that,
It
wow,
reminds us that we're human.
exactly. And that
Yeah.
we do feel,
Mhm.
even if we feel badly, that's something that we feel.
That's a great
And
point.
prior to that, prior to the heartbreak, I don't know that I really felt the way that I have come to feel, to the degree that I feel now. And it's not that it probably wasn't that I wasn't feeling at the time. It's just that I didn't have access to what I was feeling. You
Right.
know, it was it still astounds me that I was deep in depression and I didn't know it, right?
Right.
Because it was kind of like the frog in the pot, it didn't just happen like that. It was something that happened
Oh,
over time.
out of the pot and into the fire? Out of
No,
the pot of boiling water and into the fire? Is that what you're talking about?
no, what I mean is how you continually raise the temperature on the pot and
Oh, okay. And then he doesn't realize that eventually he's boiling. Got it.
right.
I remember
Thank you for that clarification.
it.
What do you
Well,
mean?
nobody ever tells that. Nobody ever like finishes that. It's always just assumed, like, because nobody actually wants to say it. That's a horrible thing you're doing to the damn frog.
Poor frogs, yes.
Just to teach a freaking lesson.
So no frogs were hurt while in the taping of
Okay.
the episode.
Yeah, let's disclaim that part. So I wanted to let you finish what you were saying, but if I may, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, the word heartbreak
Hmm,
or the term heartbreak. Is that brings us back to the fact that you're in charge of your own feelings.
hmm. Yes.
So yes, while I understand heartbreak, um, you know how I made the comment about that you were talking about the word heartbreak when you were talking about your job, and I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
I think it's very telling. Um, for me, one story that I have told in the past is when I had a best friend we were best friends for over 30 years. And then after a while, we just kind of parted ways. Over the years, we'd part ways for, a couple years. Then we'd kind of, cross paths again. Then we'd be best friends again and like nothing ever happened.
Hmm,
But this time it felt different. It felt more permanent.
hmm,
Um, and I miss her. Um, for a long time, I missed her. Like I felt heartbroken, like literally when I would talk about that or feel or think about that, I said that that was more than any heartbreak over a relationship that I've ever had.
hmm.
Any boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, that was more heartbreaking to me because I felt like there was such a huge loss. It was, first of all, over 30 years,
Yeah.
and I had a lot to let go of. Um, and I still miss her, but for me, I realized that we got together a couple times talking about, reconnecting or, kind of, for lack of a better term, getting back together, you
Sure.
know. um, we had talked about it, but I feel like a couple of questions that I ended up asking myself is if we met today, we don't have a lot in common anymore.
Hmm,
We don't really have similar interests. We don't have, and we might by now. I don't know. This has been a couple years now. I don't know. And, it could happen or whatever. But at the moment, I felt like we were trying to force something that was just, we still
sure.
have a relationship. I mean, she still holds a place in my heart, and I'd like to think that I do in hers.
Yes.
Um, but it's never going to be the same relationship as it was. I had expectations of our friendship back then, of her as a friend, and I'm sure she did of me. And it's just never going to be the same. But anyway, so I use the term heartbreak
Hmm,
for that. And like you with that job, it's a matter of how you're the you're the one in charge of your heart actually breaking.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's your perspective.
And one of the things that the feedback that I got about my speech clarified for me was
Hmm.
that the heartbreak wasn't about the job. The heartbreak was about my identity of being people called me, Dr. Garvin, or, the king of Excel, or whatever, because,
Oh,
you know,
that's funny. I was the Excel queen. That's hilarious.
we got the king and the queen of Excel. There we go.
That is funny.
But I had gotten to a point in my career where, I had a certain reputation for,
Mhm.
being able to provide answers that other people couldn't
Yep.
provide. And that was the part that there was a separation between who I was in that moment after receiving the really harsh, uh, for the way I phrase it in the speech is, I was called on the carpet and they told me in no uncertain terms that I was skating on very thin ice. Right.
Oh, okay.
So that the reality of that, my humanity, my
Hmm.
flaws, my imperfections,
Right.
and being very much a perfectionist,
Hmm.
that was very jarring. It was, at that time, it was, gosh, a relationship that I had had with myself for 40 some years.
Right.
So, and
And there they were telling you that um, you're not that valuable to us. We're gonna, one more screw up and you're out.
right. And I had
So
to,
yeah.
and so what could have happened is that I could have chosen to let their feedback, their perspective, be the driving force between, well, could have literally brought an end to my existence.
Hmm. Yeah.
And instead, the route that I went was, how do I heal that relationship with myself? Forget about the relationship that I had with work. That was just
Right.
a means to an end. It wasn't.
That's powerful. That's powerful that you wanted to own your own emotions. You wanted to own your life. So, and
Yeah.
then,
And I don't know that I was that clear on that at that
oh,
time,
you didn't know it at the time. I guarantee it. You had no idea at the time.
but there was definitely part of me that was trying to reconcile that relationship, not
Hmm.
with somebody else, like you talk about with your former best friend,
Right.
but that relationship between myself and
Right.
who I was and who I thought I should be. As Carl Rogers talks about it, the actual self and the ideal self.
Right. Well, let me clarify. I'm glad you said that, because let me clarify is I don't feel like she and I have anything to heal in our relationship.
Yeah,
I feel like we are just on separate paths right now. And maybe one day our paths will cross again. And I would love for that to happen. Maybe one day we'll reconnect again or whatever. Um, maybe she's off living her life, and in the meantime I'm living mine.
sure.
So,
Yeah,
and there's not a relationship. There's not. It's not. I feel healed in our relationship, and it took years for me to get there.
yes.
But that um, kind of
But
like the
that,
whole situation with me and Ken. 34 years later, we end up married. Who the
right.
hell would have thought of that? I mean, when we broke up the first time, I never would have thought when we broke up. Oh, there was no chance in hell we were ever going to be married.
Right.
you
Well, that's
know,
what I mean. Actually, is that you became healed. It wasn't the
right.
relationship necessarily. In a way, it's the relationship that you have with your former best friend,
Hmm.
but it's not the relationship that you have together. It's that you're both on your own separate paths now. And
Right.
living your lives,
Hmm.
and at least in your respect, that
Right.
you are in a better place than you were back when that happened.
Right.
And similarly, I don't do the same kind of work. I'm not the same person. I don't spend my days, my weeks, my years the same way that I spent them prior to my own heartbreak and
Right.
identity crisis.
I think a heartbreak reminds you that you have a heart. It's your heart.
Yes.
I think that's what a heartbreak does. As we're talking about it, that just came to me. Call it a download if you want.
The other part of it
I,
too is that with your heart breaking, with it shattering, is that you also
Mhm.
have the opportunity to put it back together,
Put the
right?
pieces back together. Yes, you're picking up the pieces, but you have to look at all the pieces to figure out where they fit.
That's a really good point. Yes. Yeah, because your heart is broken and it's not just okay, let's just get
Right.
back
You can't
to the
just
way
kind
we
of throw
were,
it all together. You can't just kind of throw it all back together and, make it work again.
put it in a doggy bag or something.
Right. Right. You have to look at each piece and figure out where it fits. How are you going to fit that story into your life story where it's not going to be, this traumatic event that has created this whole sequence of events from that. Um,
Absolutely.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And one of the interesting things about that is that in putting those pieces back together is that you don't have to put them back in the same order that they were before.
That's awesome, isn't it? I love that I have recreated my past. I've changed my past, honestly. I'm
Awesome.
so proud of that. I love I have the power to do that.
Absolutely. And so tell our audience what you mean by that in this instance.
Okay. Um when I was a teenager, my father and I did not get along. This is the biggest um example of what I mean by that. My father and I never got along. We I was very rebellious and he was very well, he understood that I was very rebellious because he was the same way.
Hmm.
So we butted heads strongly and hard a lot.
Wow.
um and when I was a teenager, I hated him. I remember um I remember saying Sissy, my best friend at the time,
Mhm.
her dad was the same. She had a similar relationship with her dad. Um, and ironically, my dad's name was Moshe, which is Moses in Hebrew, and her dad's name was Moises, which is Moses in Spanish.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
anyway, little synchronicities like that. Um, but I mean, we would sit around talking about, oh, imagine if he got hit by a bus. Wouldn't that be a great day? You know, we were horrible. We didn't want our dads making the rules for us and, telling us how to live our life. And we just wanted to be us,
Yes.
I just wanted to be me. Um, and just I felt I hated him. Um, but now when I look back, having all of the experiences I had with him since then, during his life and shortly before he died, and then all these stories that have come up since he's gone, my whole relationship with my dad has changed.
Hmm.
Now, when I think of my dad, I feel like I've always been daddy's princess.
Hmm. Wow. That's quite a
I
transformation.
It really is. I feel like um I understand him. I don't condone a lot of his actions. That's not the same as, saying, "Oh, it's okay, you're faultless, you're
Sure.
perfect."
Yes.
I don't condone, but I understand. Therefore, I could forgive. And that was huge. And I could forgive myself for, anything, for the way that I acted. It took a while. I felt guilty for a long time for feeling that way about my dad.
Mhm.
I had to forgive myself for feeling that way.
Sure.
Um, and that's the bottom line as far as, when people say forgiveness is more of a present to yourself than a present to them.
Hmm.
It really is about forgiving yourself
Yeah.
for everything. Um, and I think that that's what this whole thing brings it all back around, is that it's all about yourself. You get to decide. So
Hmm.
you don't realize it at the moment, but once you realize it, everything changes.
That's powerful. So as we wrap up today, I'm wondering what our invitation is. What's our homework for our audience this week? How do we create something new and exciting
Hmm.
with perhaps the broken pieces of our lives?
I would say start by practicing segment intending.
Hmm.
I think that is powerful. Whatever you're doing right now in this moment, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Decide what you're doing with this moment and then figure out the rest of your life.
You know,
Don't worry
and
about the rest of your life. Just right now, what are you doing?
I'm thinking about that segment intending in relationship to heartbreak and putting the
Uh-huh.
pieces back together. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like when you're, putting together an actual puzzle,
Right. A jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
and you're segment intending, you're being
Mhm.
very intentional about, okay, what do I have in my hand? What do I have in front of me, on the table?
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was envisioning just now. Just like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, like pieces of a heart that just was shattered. Pick up a piece, a chunk of glass or whatever it's made of. Pick up a chunk. What is that story? Look at that chunk and what is that story? Where are you going to put that story? You get to decide.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our invitation to you, our
Hmm.
listeners, is to look at those broken pieces as if it were a 3D
Hmm.
puzzle, and be very intentional about, one, how you look at that piece, and also how you place that piece back into the puzzle of your life.
Hmm. So as you're putting your heart back together, I mean, I can literally envision this. Like I'm watching like a little, you know, cartoon in my head of this. As you're putting back together the pieces of your life, you're putting your heart back together. You're healing each piece.
Mm,
And once you're done with that, um, can only, the possibilities are endless.
you have something new and exciting, right?
Yes, there's your new and exciting. You have a life. You have your own life that you're in charge of. Uh, you feel powerful.
Yeah. Then you get to create the life you love.
Exactly.
Excuse me.
I have loved this episode. Thank you. I've loved this
Yeah,
this conversation.
absolutely. Me too. Thank you. And to our audience, until we meet again.
Own your unforgettable story.
Yes.